Hi, BonBon here. Have I got a tutorial for you today? Well, actually, I've got a tutorial for me today. I'm currently in the process of making my last ever map for City Skylines. It's progressing well, and it won't be long before I have to do the thing that I am weakest at, and that is forest painting. Now, there's a lot of nuances to actually tree painting, lots of them. We're going to look at some of them in today's show. What I've decided to do is pick out 7 of the tree painting techniques from the masters. All of these are names that if you follow the map making fraternity at all, you're probably going to recognize all of these names. But I'm not going to tell you at the start of the show who these creators are. Let's save that to the end. But instead of referring to each of them as a number 1, number 2, number 3, so forth, I've decided, as there are 7 of them, to name them after the 7 dwarfs. So working from left to right, number 1 will be Doc, number 2 will be Grumpy, number 3 will be Happy, number 4 will be Sleepy, number 5 will be Bashful, number 6 will be Sneezy, and number 7 will be Dopey. Now, that is absolutely no reference to the creators at all. The tree painting down below was put down before I even thought about naming, and then I chose the 7 dwarfs' names in the order that they are sung in the original movie. So, Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey from left to right. But I will let you know who the actual creators were at the end of the show so that you can go and check out some more of their work. Now, the other thing you've got to remember with this particular show is trees are within context. Literally what I've been doing is I've taken some samples, and samples don't really show you everything at all. There's going to be a lot of nuance within each map from one area to another area. This was fairly generic, general stuff from one particular map from each creator. General and very specific. If I'd gone to a different part of the map, I probably could have picked something a bit different, but it wouldn't have necessarily fit with what I felt was the standard sort of practice from that creator on that particular map. Again, if I'd gone to a different map, maybe I would have got a different practice as well. And in most cases, the samples that you see below are from fairly recent maps from each creator, with one example, one exception. Anyway, there are going to be 5 different aspects that we look at today. The very first one is one I think that worries a lot of people. It's not difficult, but I think it concerns a lot of people, and that is regarding tree density. And this is that first line that we have on the screen here. Tree density. Why is tree density an issue? Well, part of that is the limitations of the game as to how many trees you can actually have on the map. Now, all of these are 100% vanilla. They're taken from 100% vanilla maps. They're 100% vanilla trees. And so we've got to put a nod to the 100% vanilla tree count. Say 250,000. It's not strictly 250,000, but let's say 250,000. They will run out very, very quickly, and they'll run out quicker if you have really dense forests, because dense forests generally means more trees. Not exclusively, we'll get to that, but it generally means more trees. So you might want to have not so dense forests. Well, let's have a little look at how these 7 creators have gone about their average forest tree density. When I say their average forest tree density, if you imagine that I went to the forest and I went to the deepest, darkest part of the forest and picked out a sample from the middle of the forest, this is kind of what we're looking at here. Again, it's a wide world out there, and variations will occur across. But checking out our first one, this is Doc. Okay, now Doc has again, obviously all the creators will be using different trees as well. What we have from Doc is some of the firs and some of the small firs as well. Again, you may even recognize some of these creators by the trees and the style that they've used. If you do, well done. If you recognize all 7, very well done. But it's not about that. We're looking about the techniques today. So, number 1, I'm going to say this is a medium density. because this is from the middle of a forest area, and we actually have some quite wide gaps in between the trees. So we have a medium density. We've got some like medium density trees here as well. They're not the thickest, bushiest of trees, but these are providing a decent amount of ground coverage in the area. Like this one here covers a good amount of ground, and so on. But there we go. So that's Doc. Let's move on and compare Doc with Grumpy. Grumpy up here uses a completely different tree mix, a wider tree mix, a more varied trick of different colors as well, as we see here. And again, if we have a look here, we've got some quite wide gaps, quite a wide gap coming through here and here. Big gap here. It's a huge gap here actually. And so yeah, a wide, almost spammed coverage. I think that's the best word I can describe for this one. There doesn't seem to be any pattern in the tree coverage, just a broad mix of colors and a broad mix of heights as well, giving us that coverage there. Going to the next one along. Next one along is, this is Happy. Now Happy is effectively using two different styles. We've got the low trees, we've got the high trees, basically. So in terms of density, from a top-down perspective, again, we've got very large holes in the trees. We're looking at, I'm going to say elite map makers here, okay? And this is the densest part of the forest. There are big gaps. So the thing that I'm learning just from these first three creators is, don't be too afraid to have a few gaps in your densest of forests. Because if they can do it, you can do it too. Moving along to Sleepy. Sleepy, this one seems a little bit more balanced. Okay, we do have some gaps going on here, but there is a balance to this one. We do have a bit of a cluster going on here, maybe a bit of a denser cluster on here, but there does seem to be more of an even balance between the tree placements for Sleepy. Moving up to Bashful. Bashful, now this one, I think we've probably got the same number of trees here, but we've gone with the bushier trees. We've got a lot more tree coverage just from this one tree here. It covers a lot more ground. So here's a technique for if you want to have bigger, bushier, more heavily filled areas. Going with the bushier trees is a way of doing that. If we compare that again, if we go back to Grumpy, over not that one, this one over here, this was more wistful and wispy, probably the same number of trees in there and more varied, arguably probably more pretty. You come down to this one, and this one is more woodland, isn't it? But again, some big gaps in there. Don't be afraid to leave some gaps in your forestry. Next one along, we are at Sneezy. Again, I see another little, I'm going to say a glade, forest glade going on there. Nice mix of trees as well in terms of the colours. We've got some in there which have got some quite large tree coverage. Some in there with some very narrow tree coverage. And also a slight variation in heights as well. It's actually a really nice forest mix, that one. That's what I'm taking from this. And again, not to be afraid to leave gaps. And we move on finally to Dopey. Dopey at the top here with some of the old school trees. We haven't got much in the way of height variation in these trees as well. And mostly we do have a little gap here and a little gap sort of at the top here, but there definitely seems an even balance of trees. So this creator is trying more of an even coverage to cover their forestry area. So that is the first phase of our 5, the tree density. And I think from that we can take it that the main lessons, I feel, are not to be afraid to leave little gaps, but also that the choices of the trees are actually quite important. For example, this one here uses quite some large bushy trees. This one uses height, between tall trees and small trees. This one uses a mix of wispy trees. So there are different styles going on there as well. This one from this height seems quite... Let's have another look at number 4, which was Sleepy. This one from above, that doesn't feel like it's got much forestry coverage at all. So if you're looking for dense forestry, might not be the creator to follow the technique of. I'm not saying this is a bad creator, and again, this is from one map, and another one of their maps might have a completely different style. I'm literally choosing from sections, and it might be the ideal forest for your next map. So yeah, just learn as we're going, okay? Learn from where we're going. Right, next up, we've got what I'm going to call the fade. So instead, this is a sliver. This is a sample selection going on here, right? Imagine this is forestry. All of this up here is forestry. There's no gaps anywhere. It's all solid woodland up here. Down here is the plains, the build plains. This is all clear of trees. What we have here is the transition, the fade between the solid forestry and the plains, the build plains. And again, you can see with all of these, there is like a gentle tapering down across all of them. You can actually see the same going across all 7. Let's go and have a little closer look at each one in turn. So the first one again, we're going down to Dock. Dock has got, again, over here, this is the standard density of their forest on the left. And as we come down, I would say that we kind of have a break at this point. I don't know if that's intentional. Again, might just be this one sliver that I've taken from one part of the map. But that is kind of the definitive point where the dense forest ends for me. And then it just fades out a little bit here. And then, so we've got kind of like a 3 density levels. We've got the main forest density, we've got a slightly lower density, and then we've got a light density. Just tapering down away from the forests. And again, as we get down to the trees at this end, there are none of the tall trees. We have these tall spindly pines. As we get down to this area, none of the tall trees at all down at this end. So again, we've tapered down not just in density, but in height also. Moving along to Grumpy. Grumpy, this one surprised me actually, in that, yeah, we have the density of forest here, but there really isn't much of a transition. Certainly in the 2 or 3 places I looked at on this particular map, there wasn't much of a transition on any of them. In fact, if there is a transition, it's almost like a wispy S. See how that... and again, that goes from standard density going down to lighter density to nothing. It's an interesting technique, and that would need to work if you then took this and repeated that over here. That would have to work across the map. But yes, we're seeing basically, if you could look at it another way and say this has had the deleted section, this has had the deleted section. It makes the whole thing go from solid down to nothing. So yeah, transition there too. Next one is Happy. Number 3 is Happy. Happy is the creator that's used the 2 style of trees, the low tree and the tall tree again. And again, we've got the same technique as with their main forest, where they've got all the... In fact, having a look at the small trees, I think the density of small trees here is the same as the density of small trees here and the small trees here. It's just literally that the large trees, they just stop. The large trees just stop, and that is how the transition is done. Just by having these large trees not extend as far as the small trees. It's a valid technique, and it definitely works. Don't think we can argue that. Next up, we have Sleepy. Sleepy. This one is quite a tough one to actually figure out, because this is you might look and go, this is denser at this end, because we have a very hard ridge there of trees. But at this end, this is the forest again. We have almost a break. In fact, it looks like a break. It looks like there's probably a road meant to be going through here. I promise you there wasn't. There was never a road going through here, but it certainly does look like there there could easily have been, or you could easily place one. But the density across the entirety of this is even. There's not really a fade at all. In fact, the only thing that makes you think there might be a fade or a break is this line here. It's a curious one. I didn't spend too much time looking at this one actually in the loads, the game load itself. But again, this is a big name creator, and one that's, you look at that and you go, is that really a fade? Well, it works because this creator has a lot of subscribers. Going from sleepy to bashful, and we have a different style of fade going on here. Again, we have the dense forestry at one end. Then we have in fact, ignore these 5 small trees here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ignore them. You then have basically you've just got a broken line here where the tree is not a straight line. It's like a bendy line here. Ignore those. Then you have a small cluster, and then a second small cluster breaking away from it. The first small cluster is attached to this main area by these small trees. So it's a very subtle way of doing it. How we move down through the dense forests. We have an extension of the dense forest here, an extension here, and they're tied together by the strategic placement of a very few wispy trees in between. And that one definitely works. And again, we've got good forestry coverage as well. This is the one with the dense trees on it. Next up is Sneezy. Sneezy definitely has fade. This is what I would define as definitive fade. Heavy, lighter, it gets quite light, then a small cluster, then another small lighter cluster at the end. The only thing I would possibly argue for this one is this pine tree here probably feels a bit out of place. I would probably remove this pine tree and replace it with maybe move the wispy one across this small one and have a copy of it. Maybe one more small tree to replace the pine tree. And I think that would be the definitive fade. I think that works really well. And probably, of the 6 we've seen so far, I think that's my favourite. I mean, there's something to be said for the first 2 as well, this one and this one. I like both of those kind of equally in different ways. This is a strong technique. Again, I'm going to say really good if you're a beginner technique. Very easy technique to copy this one with the low trees everywhere and then the high trees stopping early. Very easy to replicate that one. But yes, I think that one there is my favourite of the 6 so far. We've got one more to come. This is Dopey. Yeah, this is the same fade technique again. Probably the same sort of density of trees for the first 2/3. Then we've got a light fade along the edge here for this section, and then just 3 outlying trees as well to complete that fade there. So that concludes the first 2 parts. So you've got the density of trees followed by the fade. Which is your favourite so far? There's a good question. I mean, there's definitely some very, very clear technique differences between. I mean, you know, this one definitely stand out. This one's got a very replicatable technique as well. This one I really like, if I'm honest with you. But let's crack on and have a look at the third one. Now, the third one, you have your mountains, you have your rivers, you have your forests. They kind of set out the entirety of the map. And then you have your networks. And then between your forests and your networks is this big empty gap of flat land that is quite boring. And the way of breaking that up is with tree clusters. Little copses and little woodland areas that aren't big enough to be a forest in their own right. What we have here in this next section are literally just small copses or woodland areas. Let's check out our first one. This is Dock again. We've got again. This one's a seam style, so you can imagine like a underground lake there with underground river, and then the trees feeding off of the water. You can get that kind of feel from this. And again, it's medium density, not being afraid to leave gaps, and not being afraid, something that I'm often afraid to do. Single tree on its own feels very lonely, and yet when done with the correct skill, it feels essential. It's very, very, very clever, very cleverly done. Now moving along to Grumpy again. This is a different style altogether. In fact, this is a very different style altogether. What we have here is a hard line and a soft line. In fact, you could think of this like a fade. If you imagine the south or the bottom part of the screen here as being heavy woodland, you can see the fade moving out from the dense woodland here, going down to the sparse trees over this way, fading away. Only difference is we don't actually have a dense woodland. We have empty build plane here, and we have a fairly hard edge. Density running along one side, then slightly fading away, and just a little outlying cluster there and there. Very, very light outlying clusters. That is, I'm going to say, wistful. It's wistful tree work, and I like it. I like it. That's quality, right? Quality work. Moving along to Happy. Happy, what I'm going to say, the replicatable technique. And again, I think this just fills this one again. It's a solid looking shape, while not being square. So basically, we've gone for curves with the outline there, and with the small trees, and then we've just popped in a few of the large trees just to give it a said dimension. And again, works really well. Using that as a filler between a highway and a mountain can make the difference in a map. Next up, Sleepy. It's Sleepy again. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. This is a little bit unfair on Sleepy. So when we get to announce Sleepy's name at the end of the show, Sleepy's map that I took this from didn't really have any clusters as such. This was the nearest thing that I could find on the map to a cluster. The map itself didn't really have what you would define as a large plain with some trees in the middle. This was the nearest. It's a reasonable kind of appearance of a cluster, but again, I wouldn't judge the creator too much on this one, because it's not strictly speaking what I was looking for. And the hard edge along the side here, hardish edge along the side here, aren't necessarily typical of their work. But again, I'm not going to load up another map. I've been loading up maps for hours, and I'm not going to do any more. But anyway, there we go. So that is, I mean, it's fine. It's fine. It's not awe-inspiring, but again, it's within the context of a map. This might be perfect. It might be absolutely perfect. We're looking literally, it's like removing the Mona Lisa's eyes and looking at them. Well, yeah, I know, but they look better on the Mona Lisa, right? They really do. Okay, that was Sleepy. Bashful is next. This is different. This is very, very different. This is not being afraid to have trees with no friends, right? All of the trees here have body odor, apart from maybe these two. They can't get far enough away from each other. And if you have a look at the previous work that we've got from this creator, and it was, the trees are really tight, closely together. So they've gone from quite dense forests, dense woodland fade as well, winding their way down to very light tree clusters, filling in the gaps in the map. it's it's surprising. But again, when I tell you the creator's name at the end, you're going to say, well, yeah, I know, and I love their work. And of course you do. Of course you do. Right, moving up to Sneezy next. And this was the creator whose work on the fades, the tree fade, I really liked. And the tree cluster is, I mean, it follows that seam again. We've got we've seen the seam a couple of times, quite long. These tree clusters they're not square, they're not round, they're not blobs. They have a length and they tend to taper out at a far end. We have that one. You could say this one also seems to have the similar sort of, it's like this but without the density. This one's kind of a bit like it's a bit stubbier than the seam, isn't it, really? That one. And this one definitely is. This one's more of a, like, let's say, more like a boot. But yeah, you could argue there's a seam in there, but yeah, that's more of a cluster as well. And then you have this one. This one's clearly a seam. And the one at the bottom here, also a seam going on there as well. Which leaves us with number 7, Dopey. And Dopey's, say, got a different set of trees there. Wow, I didn't notice that. But yeah, this is Dopey's seam from the same map. I'm surprised. And again, it's very seam-like as well. In fact, this one's probably one that stands out a little bit more than the 2 previous examples of their work. It's almost like 2 separate seams that have been patched into each other. And that would definitely fill the land quite nicely there as well. So anyway, that there is most of the map covered. The density, the fade from the forests, and the seams. What we have, sorry, the clusters. Sorry, not the clusters. The clusters are seams. I'm saying seams because seams is what comes next. When you're doing mountains, running down the side of the mountains, you tend to have little seams of trees feeding up into the highlands. Now, this is a perfectly flat map. What I'm about to show you here will look better on a mountain. I did toy with actually building a mountain on this map, but then these seams would have been done specifically for the mountains that they came from, not a fake mountain. So they may as well be shown flat as they would be if they were going up into a mountain. The same technique will apply. Okay, let's have a look at Dock. We're starting with Dock. Now, Dock is, again, the lowland. I should point this one out. The lowland is here, and the highlands are up there. So most of these should go from wide to narrow in general. Dock, this is quite stubby. This is quite stubby. And again, when you find out who the creator of this is, you'll be maybe surprised that it's not more flourished and more pointy and whatever. But listen, again, first of all, this, from the map that this came from, this was perfect. So we're not finding flaws. We're looking for techniques. This is what we're looking for here. We're looking for techniques. I think the technique that we're seeing here is, again, density running up the seam, and then we've got a little bit of fade on more on one side of the seam than the other. That's more of a harder edge. And then it just tapers down. We've got a couple of trees capping off at the top. But yeah, that's a you may look at that, compare this with the next one up, where you go, well, why didn't you take that from further down? I would have done if there was any really further down, but there wasn't much in the way of further down to go into, and I would have been cropping bulk forests. This is as much as there was, and there we go. And again, it's from one map, not from, thank you, Mr. Motorbike, not from their wealth of work. This is from one map, and this was a fairly typical tree seam from that map. The next one, again, this is very similar, one would say. If I told you this is a tree cluster, you would believe it, wouldn't you? It's the same technique as the tree cluster. We have, this is the lowlands again, and it just follows the seam up into, I think this creator uses the same technique for their clusters, more or less. We do have the harder edge on the tree cluster for this creator than we do with the tree seam. With the tree seam, we have a softer edge on each side. So there's a technical difference going on there. Moving on to Happy, from Grumpy to Happy. And this is almost ugly. And I mean that in the nicest possible sense, because I know that the part of the map that I took this from, this felt absolutely perfect. And having taken that and put it into a flatland scenario, remember, this is, you imagine there's a valley running up here. This is the way to imagine this one. We have a valley running up here, and then we have sort of like the sides of the cliffs running up on each side. Again, none of this is going to showcase as well as it would do in the creator's original maps. But again, top-down technique to view the standards, the style that we've got. We do have a little bit of a triangle at the bottom there. That's an interesting thing. Is that something that can be replicated in your map, in my next map, my current map? That's an interesting thing. And then we do have a little cluster of trees going on there, the big trees, and the smaller trees dotted around the outside as transition. But that seems to be a technique that works really well for them. Moving on from Happy to Sleepy. And this is again another slightly unusual one. There's a big density of trees, and it's almost a consistent, it's almost a parallelogram, I guess. A parallelogram with a little seam on the top. Again, all of this will work specifically within the specific valley that these trees were taken from. So again, we're not being picky or being too critical about the technique. We're learning from these techniques. That's what we're trying to take from here. So yes, in terms of the technique, we've got a fairly level, we're showing that we can show density up and into a valley. And then we just have this fine little twee little thing that feeds up into the highlands. So who was that? That was Sleepy. Bashful. Again, this is very light. Is this the same creator we had? The very light, yeah. The very light tree cluster has transitioned, much like with, it was Grumpy, who had the very similar style. Slightly denser in the tree seam. We've got, the only thing that shows there's any sort of seam is this little line of trees here, which is a lot higher up than I would have imagined it to have been, given this is the lowland. But yeah, it's basically, it's just a light tapering of trees here. There doesn't really seem to be any pattern in this at all to be drawn from. Right, then Sneezy. Sneezy has got a very clear seam, in fact possibly a double seam going on here. One heading up this way, one possibly heading out that way. And again, you can imagine that this is the valley running up here, maybe a valley feeding down this way. Possibly a mountain ridge in this little corner here, and definitely one over this side too. That just works fine. It's just a slightly lighter tree splattering than on the lowlands. And then we finish back with Dopey. With Dopey, we are back to these green trees, and the green trees are well, it tapers, doesn't it? This is very similar to, I think, their tree fade technique, where we have just heavy forestry at the, well, medium density forestry at the bottom, and then it just narrows and thins as we move up and away. So that there is tree seams, and is part 4 of our explore of the forestry of some of these great creators. Now we're going to finish with the 5th one, and this one, there's a bit of personal taste in here, and there is somebody who is missing. We'll get to that. This one is field painting, or hedges, and there are different styles of hedges. There is no wrong answer. In fact, there's nothing wrong with using the prop line tool. Coming over here, there's absolutely nothing wrong with just doing a line of trees like that and calling that your hedge. That's a perfectly acceptable hedge in anybody's book, right? I think so. But let's start off with Doc. This might be instantly identifiable to some of you, the creator, just by looking at the style there. It's very symmetrical. We've got the double line of trees. Is that a double line or is it a triple line? I think it's a double line of trees going on there to mark the boundary of the field. Also a little disclaimer, some of these fields have been resized by me because they just wouldn't have worked in this video. But that one is, I think, close to as was. I think very close to as was. But there we go. So that's your first one. That's field number 1. That is from Doc. Then up to Grumpy. This is a different style altogether. And again, whimsical is the word I'm going to use for this. You look at that and you go, that's not really a field. It's an empty space with trees like fading in and around from the outside and dotted around. There's no hard line going on here. But when you look at this within the context of the map, this is very clearly a field. There might have been a field immediately alongside it, and this would be the dividing hedge line. So doing something whimsical like this, almost with a circular field, is something that can work and definitely does work for some of the top creators. Moving from Grumpy to Happy. Now this one has been resized quite a lot. It was quite a large field and you won't be able to get good visibility. So I've chopped a chunk of the hedge line off here and up there, and same here. Moved these two corners in, but it's the same technique that they have used on their map across the whole. It's quite simple. Again, it's a seam, a fairly straight seam tapering down, a fairly straight seam again tapering from heavier in the corner running down to light on the extremes, and leaves you to use your imagination to believe that that is a field. Let's look at those first three in comparison to each other, and you can see from here, this is, we said this is a circle. I mean, it's more of an oval, but that looks square, doesn't it? It looks square, and all because of the clever tree work here. I mean, not square, but you get my drift, right? That one clearly is. This one subtly off. This one definitely, but this would not contain any livestock in here is going to wander off. But it just goes to show you don't have to fill in every single hole. Absolutely don't have to. Right, now the next one, the creator of these here, while this is the creator also where I said that there wasn't really a tree cluster, there weren't any fields on this particular creator's map, so we're going to skip over them. All right, we're going to skip over them. So this creator we won't be seeing a field from because it wasn't one in the map. The next creator though, the one next along, number 5 here, which is Bashful. We're up to Bashful. It's big. All right, it's very, very big, and I'm going to tell you, I have resized this down substantially. This was probably about another 50% larger than you see here. So resized down. You can probably see the line there where I've kind of like cropped that in and dragged it in. I think we've cropped that and dragged this in as well. Just taking out some of the depth. This actually isn't so much a hedge line as a hole in the forest. If you imagine this then having forestry coming out in all the areas, and because of the shape of this and the location of it, it felt more like a field than it would have done an area cleared for city building or tree felling. The only thing this really felt like it was a field. So it's possible, once you've drawn out your forests, if you need to save some trees, possibly do a clearance within the trees of sort of like straightish lines. I mean, I know that waves, but you can see that the line does kind of run along here. So what you could do is you could create a field or two within your forestry to free up some trees. It's a technique that works because this creator does it, and you're going to know the creator's name. Currently, it's Bashful. Alright, moving on to Sneezy. Sneezy, very definitively, this is a field. Right? There's no argument there. I wouldn't say that this looks to me like a believable field in terms of the trees that actually mark out the limits of the field. But these trees would fit into the context of the map. These are the trees that are being used in the map. And so not having them involved in this sort of area would make this field feel a little bit alien within the context of the map. In terms of the shape, very square or rectangle, and again, we're not afraid to leave gaps in the field, and we're also not afraid just to add some depth, like here in the corner. I do find that's a very strong technique. We saw that previously from one of the other creators here. Heavy corners. Well, it's definitely heavy corner there. Over here, heavy corners here and here as well, where it's all built out. And again, this creator for Grumpy at the beginning, we have heavy corners. So yeah, there's a technique. Looks like fields. If you go heavier with the trees in the corner, that works quite well. And we finish with Dopey and their version of a field. And this one definitely has some very clean square edges. We have thickness in the trees, in the hedges there as well. Little one or two gaps in the trees. Again, not afraid to leave a gap or two in the trees. And that as a field, I feel is more believable as a field than possibly some of the. I mean, this one I feel certainly feels more believable to me. Maybe not as aesthetically pleasing as this one. This one's definitely a sharper vibe to it, but a more realism in that one. And again, it's a different sort of field from a clearance in the forest. Possibly a little bit more realism and detail to this one, which is slightly more wistfully done. Then you get to the wistful one from Grumpy, and then you get the very harsh lines, very bold, very stylized fields from Doc at the #1 position. So pull the camera back so we can take in all of the imagery. There we go, like so. So what do I take from this? I take from this that personally, and again, everybody will have their own opinions. I like with the density of the forests that you should add height as well as breadth into the trees. So that stands well. A mix of trees is aesthetically more pleasing than a standard solid bank of trees of the same variety. The thickness in trees can also lead to good ground coverage. Fade, there are a few different techniques for fade, but the whole point where you have the thicker, taller trees moving down to the smaller, thinner trees, and then have them slightly more sparsely placed around the outside. That is a way of making that work. Not to be afraid to leave gaps, because while it looks empty to me now, it works perfectly in the context of the map that it was taken from. And in terms of fields, there are so many different ways and styles of doing it. We'll all have our personal favourites. And then within the context of the map that comes from, this style of field on that map would not work, and this style of field on that map would not work, and so forth. So choosing a style of field painting and being consistent with that style of field painting, in fact being consistent with your style of tree painting across the map, is definitely a technique to look at. So the question is, I know you're asking, or you're guessing, I know you're guessing, which creator is responsible for which, remembering of course that the middle creator here doesn't have a field. This is creator 5 is the creator of that farm there. Right, so working from left to right, Doc, this over on the left hand edge here. If any of you said that Doc was Bringer of Fire, you were 100% correct. I would say that the field painting for field lines for Bringer of Fire are very, very iconic, very recognisable. I would say that was a fairly easy shout for anybody who's played any number of maps. So well done if you said that anyway. Moving on to the second one. The second one is very, very iconic and very, very clear. You're not going to be surprised when I tell you this is Sidai. Sidai's maps. Very, very clear. I didn't realise just how diverse the tree mix is that Sidai likes to use, but it works so well. So I mean, these are your big hitters, aren't they? Bringer of Fire and Sidai, your big hitters. Beautiful works there. Right, so Doc and Grumpy are out of the way. Sorry, Sidai. Somebody had to be grumpy. It happened to be you, but it could easily have been anybody else. Just the order of the way that I was saving the files. Next up, Happy. Now, Happy, a little bit harder to work out who Happy is, but if I tell you Happy is Imi Hahuli trademark, that is what we have with Happy. So if you liked this style of work, go check out Imi Hahuli's maps. They are, as I suggested, especially across the middle to here, very replicatable. If you like theirs is probably going to be the easiest to copy if you like the work. If you don't like it, then copy somebody else's. But if you like all of 6 and you're looking for one that's going to be fairly easy to replicate, Imi Hahuli has got a very replicatable technique and great work from them. Up to number 4. These 4 here, again, it's a little bit unfair on this creator. Number 4, of course, was Sleepy, because we don't have a field for Sleepy, and we didn't really have a true tree cluster from Sleepy either. But Sleepy was the infamous, the legendary Teddy Radko. So Teddy Radko's work going on at number 4. Again, good work there as well, and a really nice tree mix to boot. Moving on to number 5, a lot of people's favourite. Personally, I mean, I like their work. I wouldn't have them as one of my favourites, but I bow to everybody else's greater knowledge because they're exceptional at map making. But tree painting, maybe not for me personally. Number 5, sorry, what number are we? 5, Bashful. It's Sanctum Gamer at number 5. Moving up to number 6, Sneezy. And again, I didn't have any preconceptions before I started this one. And I would say actually number 6 across the whole, I would have as my favourite. Not in every category, but if I was scoring everything in terms of categories, I think I quite like number 6. And number 6 is Maverick. A fairly newcomer compared to some of the others. A newcomer. Maverick's been around for a while now, but yeah, I like the little finesse that Maverick brings to their tree painting without being as finessed as, say, a Sidai, which is frankly ridiculous. And then on to number 7. To be fair to the creator, the map is that it's taken from is an older one because they haven't done a vanilla one for quite some time. But the standards of their recent work is very similar. But I wanted to choose one where all the trees were of vanilla. And so this one is a creator known in this show as Dopey, known to you as Dopey, because creator number 7 is, in fact, me, BonBonB. I'm BonBonB, you're very, very welcome. I just wanted to compare my work side by side with some of the works of people that are clearly better than me. And so if you're looking at these going, yeah, I'm going to be honest and fair with myself here. I like my field. I like my field from that one. It was, I think it was, I don't even know if I actually shared this map to the workshop. It was like 3/4 finished, and I didn't like the way it was feeling. But it was, and again, most of that was because it was 100% vanilla trees. It didn't look and feel right to me. I struggled. But the field, I like my field there. I would take that field over. I think I won this category. in my biased opinion, I think I won this category. I think I came rock bottom in all the other categories, but I think I won this one. But I can see arguments for any of the other five. If you like any of the other five over my one, then you're also correct as well, because they all this wouldn't work in Bringer's map, this wouldn't work in Sidai's map, and so on. So just in isolation, in this showcase, I think I like that. But anyway, I've been waffling for a long while now. Let me know in the comments what you think, what you have taken from this. If there were any vanilla creators that I should have included but didn't, I'm thinking someone like Mr. Miyagi might have been a pretty good call, although they haven't made much recently. And again, it would be kind of like where I've taken some of my older work here and showcased it. I would have been doing that the same with him, and I'm not sure how fair that would have been. But anyway, yes. From this, I've taken that the other A-tier map makers are half a tier, if not more, above where I was. But I'm going to learn some techniques from this and I'm going to incorporate them into my last map, which should be available in the near future. But that's it from me. If you haven't already hit the like button, please take the time to do so. It'd be very kind. And I'll be back very, very soon. Lots of live map making on the channel as well. I don't want you to miss any of it. I've been BonBonB. You've been very, very welcome. And I'll see you again very, very soon. Thanks for watching.